The bullet tore through Brooke Williams' chest with devastating force, sending her crashing against the concrete barrier as enemy fire erupted around her. Blood poured from the wound, pooling on the dusty ground beneath her trembling hands. But instead of crying for help or surrendering to the pain, this 23-year-old intelligence analyst did something that would change military history forever. With her own blood as ink and her finger as a pen, she began marking enemy sniper positions on the wall behind her, creating a tactical map that would save dozens of lives and prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most desperate moments. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Nightingale in southeastern Romania, where the multinational peacekeeping force had established their regional headquarters. It was supposed to be a routine Tuesday in March 2023, the kind of peaceful day that made soldiers almost forget they were stationed in one of Europe's most volatile border regions. The base hummed with its usual rhythm, generators providing steady power, communication arrays crackling with routine traffic, and the distant sound of morning drills echoing across the compound. Brooke Williams sat in the climate-controlled intelligence center, surrounded by multiple computer screens displaying satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and terrain analysis data. At 23, she was one of the youngest intelligence analysts ever deployed to such a critical posting, but her youthful appearance often worked against her in a field dominated by grizzled veterans twice her age. Standing barely 5'4" with auburn hair always pulled back in regulation style, Brooke had learned to make herself invisible in briefing rooms where colonels and majors discussed strategies that could affect thousands of lives. Her workstation was a testament to meticulous organization. Color-coded files, precisely arranged reference materials, and detailed maps marked with her own analysis notes that went far beyond her official responsibilities. While other analysts focused on their specific assigned sectors, Brooke had spent months creating comprehensive threat assessments for the entire region. She studied patrol routes, analyzed communication patterns, and identified potential weak points in base security that kept her awake at night. The intelligence center buzzed with activity as morning briefings prepared to begin. Major Harrison Koch, the unit's intelligence chief, strode through the center reviewing overnight reports with his usual air of military efficiency. Behind him followed the usual entourage of senior staff: Captain Martinez from Tactical Operations, Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds from Base Security, and several other officers whose opinions carried weight in decisions that mattered. Brooke glanced up from her workstation as they passed, knowing that despite her months of exceptional work, she remained essentially invisible to the command structure. Her analyses were thorough, her predictions accurate, and her attention to detail unmatched by anyone in the unit. Yet, when it came to the important briefings, the critical decisions, the missions that could make or break careers, she was consistently overlooked in favor of more senior personnel who possessed less knowledge but carried more rank. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd graduated top of her class from the Defense Intelligence Academy, had broken records in analytical assessment training, and possessed an intuitive understanding of regional politics that impressed even her instructors. But in the real world of military operations, competence often took a back seat to seniority, and innovation was frequently viewed with suspicion rather than appreciation. As the morning briefing commenced in the adjacent conference room, could hear fragments of discussion through the thin walls. Today's agenda focused on recent intelligence suggesting increased militant activity in the surrounding hills, the same intelligence that Brooke had been tracking for weeks through her unauthorized analysis of communication intercepts and satellite imagery. She'd identified patterns that others had missed, recognized escalation indicators that deserved immediate attention, but her concerns were relegated to routine reports that gathered dust in filing systems. The base operated under the comfortable assumption that their position was secure, that threats would come with adequate warning, and that their established protocols could handle any situation that might arise. This confidence, while understandable given their technological advantages and superior firepower, concerned Brooke deeply. Her analysis suggested that conventional wisdom was dangerously wrong, that the enemy was adapting faster than anyone realized, and that the base's greatest vulnerabilities lay not in obvious places, but in the gaps between standard operating procedures.
The afternoon briefing room felt stifling despite the air conditioning, filled with the usual collection of senior officers who treated intelligence briefings as routine administrative requirements rather than critical strategic sessions. Brooke sat in her designated chair near the back, notepad ready, knowing that her role would be limited to providing technical clarification if specifically requested. Major Coach stood at the front, presenting overnight intelligence summaries with practiced efficiency. Sector 7 remains quiet, he announced, pointing to the digital map display. Routine patrols report normal activity levels, no significant changes in baseline threat assessment. Brooke's pen hesitated over her notepad. Her analysis of communication intercepts from Sector 7 told a different story. Subtle increases in encrypted traffic, changes in transmission timing that suggested coordination activities, and equipment signatures that indicated possible weapons movement. She documented these concerns in detailed reports submitted through proper channels, but they'd been classified as preliminary indicators requiring further verification and filed away pending additional confirmation. The system demanded certainty before action, but intelligence work often required acting on probabilities and patterns rather than absolute proof. "Williams," Major Koch's voice cut through her thoughts, "your sector analysis shows anything worth noting?" The question carried the tone of routine courtesy rather than genuine interest, asked because protocol demanded input from assigned analysts, not because her opinion was particularly valued. "Sir, I've identified some anomalous communication patterns in the eastern perimeter zones. Traffic analysis suggests possible coordination activities that merit enhanced surveillance." Captain Martinez leaned back in his chair with barely concealed skepticism. "Anomalous how? We run continuous monitoring on all regional communications. If there was something significant, our primary systems would have flagged it." "The patterns are subtle, sir. Timing changes, frequency variations, encryption-level modifications that individually seem insignificant but collectively suggest organized activity." Brooke had rehearsed this explanation countless times, knowing that her analysis required more nuanced interpretation than automated systems typically provided. "So you're suggesting our million-dollar monitoring systems missed something that you picked up with manual analysis?" The question came from Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds, whose tone made clear his opinion of junior analysts who thought they could outsmart established technology. "Not missed, sir. The systems flagged the individual elements correctly. My analysis suggests the significance lies in the patterns when viewed comprehensively rather than as isolated incidents." Brooke could feel the familiar weight of dismissal settling over the room. Her insights, regardless of their accuracy, were being filtered through the lens of her rank and experience, rather than evaluated on their merit. Major Koch shuffled through his papers, clearly eager to move past this digression. "Williams, submit your detailed analysis through proper channels for senior review. If there's substance to these patterns, the appropriate personnel will evaluate them accordingly." Translation: "Your concerns have been noted and will be filed away where they can be safely ignored." Brooke nodded professionally, but internally felt the sting of another dismissal. This wasn't the first time her analysis had been deemed interesting but preliminary by people who lacked the technical background to understand its implications. After the briefing dispersed, she lingered near the conference table, gathering her materials while catching fragments of conversation that reinforced her growing frustration. "Williams means well," she heard Captain Martinez saying to a colleague, "but she tends to see patterns where none exist. Classic case of overthinking limited data." "Intelligence analysis requires experience," Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds added. "You can't learn threat assessment from textbooks. It takes years in the field to develop proper judgment." The irony burned. Brooke's textbook knowledge included advanced pattern recognition training, statistical analysis techniques, and regional expertise that exceeded most of the people dismissing her work. But military culture valued experience over innovation, seniority over insight, and established procedures over adaptive thinking. Walking back to her workstation, she passed the base's main communication center, where technicians monitored real-time intelligence feeds. She paused, observing the routine processing of information that her analysis suggested might be critically important. The base operated with confidence in its established systems, its proven procedures, its experienced leadership. But confidence, she knew, could be the most dangerous vulnerability of all. That evening, she sat in her quarters reviewing her unauthorized regional analysis, detailed assessments that went far beyond her assigned responsibilities, but reflected her genuine concern for base security. The patterns she had identified were becoming clearer, more urgent, more obviously indicative of organized threat activity. But pattern recognition meant nothing if no one with authority was willing to listen. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative.
While her colleagues spent evenings in the recreation center playing cards and watching movies, Brooke Williams transformed her quarters into an unofficial intelligence laboratory. Her regulation desk overflowed with detailed topographical maps she'd requested through official channels, covered with annotations that revealed months of meticulous study. Every ridge, valley, and potential approach route within a 50-kilometer radius had been analyzed, cataloged, and assessed for tactical significance. Her personal laptop contained files that technically violated data storage protocols. Comprehensive threat assessments she'd compiled using open-source intelligence, communication intercepts, and satellite imagery analysis. She'd learned to navigate the gray areas of military regulations, accessing information through legitimate channels, but synthesizing it in ways that went far beyond her official responsibilities. The work consumed her free time, but Brooke understood that preparation was the only way to create opportunity in an environment that consistently undervalued her contributions. Night after night, she studied regional politics, ethnic tensions, and historical conflict patterns that provided context for current intelligence indicators. While others relied on briefing summaries and executive reports, Brooke consumed primary sources: intercepted communications, economic data, social media analysis, and demographic studies that painted a comprehensive picture of regional instability. Her understanding of the local situation had grown far beyond that of most senior officers, but this expertise remained invisible to a command structure that measured competence through rank rather than knowledge. The breakthrough came during a routine analysis of communication metadata from the surrounding region. Standard protocols focused on content analysis, what was being said in intercepted transmissions. But Brooke had developed techniques for analyzing communication patterns, when, where, and how frequently transmissions occurred. The patterns she identified suggested coordination activities that automated systems had classified as normal background noise. Working late into the night, she cross-referenced these communication patterns with known militant group operational procedures documented in classified intelligence databases. The correlation was unmistakable: timing sequences that matched preparation phases, frequency patterns consistent with weapons movement, and encryption protocols identical to those used in previous attacks against international forces. But pattern analysis required human interpretation that computer systems couldn't provide, and senior analysts were too busy with routine administrative duties to conduct such detailed investigations. Brooke's unofficial research led her to develop contingency plans that assumed conventional security measures might prove inadequate. She studied base defensive positions, identified potential weak points in perimeter security, and analyzed response protocols for various attack scenarios. Her conclusions were troubling. The base's defensive strategy relied heavily on early warning systems and technological superiority, but it was vulnerable to coordinated attacks that exploited gaps in coverage and response timing. These concerns led her to acquire additional training through online courses and correspondence programs that she completed during off-duty hours. Advanced pattern recognition, threat assessment methodologies, tactical analysis techniques, and regional language skills that enhanced her ability to interpret intercepted communications. None of this training was officially recognized or credited toward her military career progression, but it filled critical knowledge gaps that might prove essential in emergency situations. Her most significant preparation involved developing alternative communication protocols for scenarios where standard systems might be compromised.
She'd identified backup transmission methods, memorized frequency allocations for emergency communications, and established procedures for maintaining contact with command elements during crisis situations. This preparation required her to understand technical aspects of military communications that went far beyond her assigned duties. But Brooke recognized that crisis situations often demanded capabilities that weren't covered by standard job descriptions. The isolation that came with her dedication was profound. Other intelligence personnel viewed her intensity with suspicion, questioning why she invested so much time in work that wasn't directly rewarded or recognized. Some colleagues suggested that her obsessive attention to detail indicated poor judgment about priorities, while others implied that her desire to exceed expectations reflected inappropriate ambition for someone at her rank and experience level. But Brooke had learned that being ready for opportunity was the only way to create it in an environment that consistently undervalued her contributions. Every skill she developed, every piece of knowledge she acquired, every procedure she mastered represented preparation for a moment that might never come. But if it did, she would be ready. Her dedication wasn't about recognition or advancement. It was about being capable of serving when circumstances demanded capabilities that others didn't possess. Late at night, reviewing her unauthorized intelligence analysis, Brooke often wondered if her preparation was excessive, if her concerns were unfounded, if her superiors were right to dismiss her warnings as the anxious overthinking of an inexperienced analyst. But the patterns she'd identified were becoming clearer, more urgent, more obviously indicative of imminent threat activity. And if she was right, her preparation might be the difference between routine security and catastrophic failure.
The whispers started subtly, as they always did in military environments where conformity was valued over innovation. Brooke first noticed them during equipment briefings, when Sergeant Collins asked her to verify inventory reports with an edge of suspicion that hadn't been there before. Her numbers were accurate, as they always were, but Collins' doubt planted seeds that began growing throughout the intelligence unit. Williams spends an awful lot of time on analysis that's outside her assigned sector, she overheard Private Henderson telling his workstation neighbor during a routine briefing. Makes you wonder what she's really working on when she stays late every night. The comment stung because it twisted her dedication into something questionable. Brooke's comprehensive approach to intelligence analysis, studying regional patterns, cross-referencing multiple data sources, developing contingency assessments, was being reframed as inappropriate focus on duties that weren't specifically assigned to her. The implication was clear. Her thoroughness was somehow suspicious rather than commendable. Major Koch called her into his office 3 days later for what he termed a performance consultation. Brooke sat across from his desk, her service record spread between them like evidence in a trial. The manila folders contained months of exemplary ratings, commendations for analytical accuracy, and documentation of her consistent excellence in assigned duties. "Williams, your technical work is undeniably thorough," Conch began, his fingers drumming against the desk's surface. "Your attention to detail exceeds expectations, and your analytical reports demonstrate comprehensive understanding of assigned materials. However, there have been concerns raised about your scope of focus." "What kind of concerns, sir?" asked Brooke, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Concerns suggesting that you might be more interested in duties outside your assigned responsibilities than in focusing on your specific role within this unit." The implication was clear. Her thoroughness was somehow suspicious rather than commendable. "My analysis work has consistently met or exceeded all established benchmarks. I've never neglected assigned duties in favor of additional research." She kept her voice steady, despite feeling the familiar weight of institutional dismissal. "That's not the issue," Koch replied, leaning back in his chair. "The issue is scope. You're conducting regional analysis that falls outside your sector assignment. You're studying communication patterns beyond your technical specifications. You're developing threat assessments for scenarios that other personnel are responsible for addressing." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Her dedication to understanding the broader tactical picture,
Her efforts to provide comprehensive intelligence support, her commitment to being ready for whatever the mission might require, all of it was being characterized as overreach rather than excellence. Sir, comprehensive intelligence analysis requires understanding contextual factors that might affect assigned sectors. My additional research enhances the quality of my primary duties rather than detracting from them. She'd rehearsed this defense countless times, knowing that her methodology was sound, even if it wasn't appreciated. Williams, this unit requires analysts who focus on their specific assignments rather than attempting to replicate work that senior personnel are qualified to handle. Your job is to analyze communication intercepts from Sector 4, not to develop base-wide threat assessments or regional security evaluations. The limitation felt like being told to work with one hand tied behind her back. Effective intelligence analysis required synthesis, pattern recognition, and comprehensive understanding that couldn't be achieved through narrow specialization. But military hierarchy valued clearly defined roles over adaptive thinking, and her approach was being treated as insubordination rather than innovation. I need to know that my analysts are focused on their assigned responsibilities. I can't have personnel conducting unauthorized research projects or developing independent conclusions about matters outside their expertise level. After leaving Cox's office, Brooke walked through the base feeling like she'd been professionally neutered. Her comprehensive approach to intelligence work, the very thing that made her analysis more accurate and valuable, was being treated as a character flaw that needed correction. The message was clear: limit yourself to the narrow role others have defined for you, regardless of your capabilities or the mission's requirements. That evening, she sat in her quarters, staring at the detailed analysis files she'd been working on for months. Comprehensive threat assessments, communication pattern studies, regional stability evaluations, tactical vulnerability analysis. All of it dismissed as inappropriate ambition by people who lacked the technical background to evaluate its quality or significance. The worst part was watching colleagues distance themselves from her perceived nonconformity. Rachel Morrison, one of the other women in the intelligence unit, began avoiding casual conversations. Even Tom Bradley, who'd previously sought her input on complex analytical problems, started consulting with more senior personnel instead. Brooke understood the dynamics at play. Military culture rewarded compliance over excellence, and her commitment to comprehensive intelligence work was being interpreted as refusal to accept limitations. But limitation, she knew, was exactly what could get people killed when threats materialized that narrow specialization couldn't address.
The confrontation came on a Thursday morning that had started like any other, with routine intelligence briefings and standard operational updates. But Major Coach's summons to his office carried an ominous weight that Brooke felt in her stomach as she walked across the base compound. The spring sunshine felt mockingly cheerful, given the storm clouds gathering around her career. Coach wasn't alone when she entered. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds sat in one of the visitor chairs, his expression stern and disapproving. Captain Martinez occupied the other chair, completing what felt distinctly like a tribunal designed to address her perceived infractions. The arrangement sent a clear message. This wasn't a routine consultation, but a formal correction of problematic behavior. "Williams, sit down," Coach commanded, his voice carrying none of the professional courtesy that had characterized their previous interactions. "We need to discuss your understanding of your role within this unit and your responsibilities as an intelligence analyst." Brooke took the remaining chair, sitting straight despite feeling like she was being positioned as a defendant in proceedings where the verdict had already been determined. Her service record lay open on Coach's desk, but now it felt less like documentation of excellence and more like evidence of misconduct. "Your performance reviews indicate technical competence," Reynolds began, consulting a file that Brooke assumed contained complaints about her work methodology. "However, there are significant concerns about your adherence to established protocols and your willingness to operate within assigned parameters." Sir, I've consistently met all performance benchmarks and exceeded expectations in analytical accuracy. Accuracy isn't the issue, Martinez interjected sharply. The issue is authority. You're conducting analysis outside your assigned sector, developing threat assessments beyond your experience level, and presenting conclusions about matters that fall under senior analyst jurisdiction. The words struck like accusations of treason. Her comprehensive approach to intelligence work, her dedication to understanding the broader tactical picture, her commitment to providing the most accurate analysis possible, all of it was being reframed as arrogance and insubordination. "Williams," Coach said, his tone taking on the weight of final judgment. "Military intelligence operates through clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Your sector assignment exists for a reason. Senior analysts handle regional assessments because they possess the experience and authority to make such evaluations. Your job is to provide technical analysis of assigned intercepts, not to develop independent strategic conclusions." Sir, effective intelligence analysis requires understanding contextual factors that affect interpretation. My comprehensive approach enhances accuracy rather than overstepping boundaries, Brooke replied, making one final attempt to defend her methodology. "That's exactly the attitude we're here to address," Reynolds said coldly. "You seem to believe that your judgment supersedes established procedures and senior analyst expertise. That's not how military intelligence functions, and it's not how this unit operates." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the essential message had been delivered in those first exchanges. Brooke was being told to limit herself to the narrow technical role that others had defined for her, regardless of her capabilities or the quality of her work. Her comprehensive analysis was being characterized as inappropriate ambition, her dedication as poor judgment, her excellence as insubordination. "From this point forward," Coach concluded, "you will restrict your analysis to assigned intercepts from Sector 4. No regional assessments, no pattern analysis beyond your specific technical responsibilities, no strategic evaluations that fall outside your designated role. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Brooke replied, although understanding and acceptance were entirely different things. "Williams, you have considerable technical skills," Reynolds added, with what might have been meant as encouragement. "But those skills need to be applied within appropriate boundaries. Focus on being the best sector analyst you can be, rather than attempting to replicate work that senior personnel are qualified to handle." As she walked back to her workstation, she felt like she'd been professionally diminished, reduced from a comprehensive intelligence analyst to a technician whose job was to process assigned data without thinking about its broader implications. The irony was devastating. Her superior analytical capabilities were being treated as character flaws that needed correction, rather than assets that enhanced unit effectiveness. That afternoon, she began the process of complying with her new limitations. Comprehensive threat assessments went into personal files. Regional analysis was discontinued. Pattern recognition studies that had revealed critical intelligence indicators were abandoned in favor of narrow technical processing that met expectations but provided limited tactical value. But even as she accepted these restrictions, Brooke knew that threats didn't respect organizational boundaries, and effectiveness couldn't be achieved through bureaucratic limitations. Somewhere in the data she was no longer allowed to analyze comprehensively, patterns were developing that could affect everyone on the base, and when those patterns materialized into reality, her imposed limitations might be the difference between successful defense and catastrophic failure.
The attack began at 03:47 hours on what had promised to be another routine morning. Brooke was reviewing overnight communication intercepts in the Quiet Intelligence Center when the first explosion shattered the pre-dawn calm. The building shook violently, throwing her from her chair as emergency lighting flickered on and alarms began their urgent wailing across the base compound. Through the reinforced windows, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions in the surrounding hills, the same positions she'd identified weeks ago as potential threat locations in analysis that had been dismissed as preliminary indicators requiring further verification. The coordinated nature of the attack was immediately apparent. Simultaneous strikes from prepared positions, communication jamming that disrupted standard defensive protocols, and tactical precision that spoke of extensive planning and reconnaissance. The base's defensive response was swift, but clearly caught off guard by the attack's sophistication. Return fire erupted from defensive positions, but the enemy had chosen their locations expertly, using terrain features and prepared cover that negated much of the base's technological advantages. The early warning systems that everyone had relied upon had provided minimal advance notice, exactly as Brooke's analysis had predicted when she'd identified vulnerabilities in sensor coverage and response timing. Major Koch burst into the intelligence center, his face grim as he coordinated with defensive teams via radio. "Williams, I need current threat assessment on enemy positions," he shouted over the noise of continuing explosions. "Where are they firing from and how many are we dealing with?" Brooke was already working at her terminal, cross-referencing incoming reports with her unauthorized analysis of potential attack routes and staging areas. The patterns she'd identified months ago were proving devastatingly accurate. The enemy had positioned themselves exactly where her dismissed intelligence assessments had predicted they would, using approach routes she'd mapped in detail during her inappropriate comprehensive analysis. "Sir, primary fire is coming from 3 prepared positions on the eastern ridge," she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed files she wasn't supposed to have. "Secondary positions on the northern approach are providing covering fire and communication relay. Based on muzzle flash patterns and firing rates, estimated 40 to 60 combatants with heavy weapon support." "How the hell do you know their positions so precisely?" Koch demanded, looking at her with a mixture of desperation and suspicion. "I've been tracking preparation activities in those areas for weeks, sir. The communication patterns, equipment movement indicators, reconnaissance activities, all of it pointed to an attack staged from those exact locations." The words came out in a rush as Brooke tried to provide critical information while explosions continued to rock the compound. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate reports from defensive teams struggling to identify enemy positions and coordinate effective counterfire. Standard reconnaissance assets were having difficulty locating targets that were well concealed and expertly positioned, while communication jamming disrupted coordination between defensive elements. "Williams," Koch said, his voice carrying new urgency, "if you know where they are, why weren't we prepared for this?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Brooke looked at her superior officer, the man who had explicitly ordered her to limit her analysis to narrow technical processing, and felt anger mixing with the adrenaline flooding her system. "Sir, I submitted detailed threat assessments identifying these exact positions and attack indicators. They were classified as preliminary intelligence requiring senior verification and filed for further review." Her voice remained steady despite the chaos around them, but each word carried the weight of institutional failure. Another explosion, closer this time, shook the building and sent equipment crashing to the floor. Through her earpiece, Brooke could hear field commanders requesting immediate intelligence support to identify enemy positions and coordinate counterattacks. The base's sophisticated surveillance systems were struggling to provide the real-time tactical intelligence that successful defense required. Koch grabbed his radio, coordinating with Captain Martinez, who was leading one of the defensive teams. "Martinez, do you have visual on enemy positions?" "Negative," came the reply through static and gunfire. "They're well concealed and using terrain to mask their locations. We need intelligence support to direct effective fire." Brooke watched the tactical display showing friendly positions and known threat areas, but it was incomplete and outdated compared to her comprehensive analysis of enemy capabilities and likely tactics. The information that could save lives was sitting in files that had been dismissed as unauthorized overreach by the same people who now desperately needed it. "Sir," she said, addressing Koch with new determination, "I have detailed analysis of their complete tactical setup, including likely escape routes, communication nodes, and support positions. The intelligence exists to coordinate an effective counterattack." Koch stared at her for a moment, the sound of continuing gunfire providing urgent punctuation to their conversation.
Around them, other intelligence personnel were struggling to provide the kind of comprehensive threat assessment that Brooke had been forbidden to conduct. "Williams," Cox said, finally, "right now I don't care about protocols or proper channels. If you have intelligence that can help our people, use it." It was authorization she'd been waiting months to receive, but it had taken a crisis that might cost lives to overcome the institutional limitations that had prevented her from doing her job effectively. As she began accessing her comprehensive threat analysis files, Brooke realized that this moment represented both vindication of her methods and tragedy that they hadn't been utilized before the enemy struck. The attack was unfolding exactly as her dismissed intelligence assessments had predicted. Now the question was whether her preparation could help save the lives that might have been protected if anyone had been willing to listen.
The Eastern Communications Facility sat on a small rise overlooking the base's primary sensor array, connected to the main compound by a concrete pathway that offered minimal cover from elevated positions. As Brooke approached with the hastily assembled security team, she could see exactly why the enemy had chosen this target. Its strategic importance was matched only by its vulnerability to coordinated assault. Lieutenant Peters led the four-person security team with obvious reluctance, clearly uncomfortable with taking tactical guidance from an intelligence analyst who had never seen combat. "Williams, just so we're clear, you're here to provide information about enemy approach routes. Leave the actual fighting to people who know what they're doing." Brooke nodded, understanding the skepticism, but knowing that her comprehensive analysis gave her insights that combat experience alone couldn't provide. She'd studied this terrain for months, had identified every potential firing position, every approach route, every tactical advantage that attackers might exploit. Her knowledge was theoretical, but it was also complete in ways that practical experience often wasn't. The communications facility consisted of three main structures: the primary transmission building, a backup generator facility, and a maintenance shed that housed technical equipment. Brooke's analysis had identified the optimal attack sequence: disable the backup power first to limit defensive options, then assault the main facility while defenders were responding to the initial threat. "Lieutenant, they'll approach from the northeast ravine," she said, pointing to terrain features that weren't visible from their current position, but were clearly marked in her mental map of the area. "The initial team will target the generator facility to create confusion. Then the main assault force will hit the main transmission building from the southern approach while we're responding to the first threat." Peters studied the terrain with new attention, beginning to understand that Brooke's intelligence went beyond standard briefing materials. "How do you know their assault sequence so precisely?" "I've analyzed their communication patterns, studied their tactical doctrines, and mapped every approach route in this area. This attack isn't improvised, it's been planned for months, and I've been tracking the preparation activities." The team began positioning themselves according to Brooke's guidance, covering approaches that standard defensive protocols might have overlooked. She directed Sergeant Collins to an elevated position that would provide overwatch of the ravine approach, while Corporal Martinez took cover near the generator facility where he could respond to the initial diversionary assault. As they waited in position, Brooke felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These soldiers were trusting her analysis with their lives, following guidance from someone whose combat experience consisted entirely of training exercises and theoretical study. But her preparation had been comprehensive, and her understanding of enemy capabilities was based on months of detailed intelligence work that had proven accurate in every significant detail. The radio crackled with updates from the main battle, where Captain Martinez's team was successfully engaging enemy positions using coordinates from Brooke's tactical assessment. "Command, enemy resistance is collapsing on the northern ridge. Looks like they're beginning to withdraw from primary positions." Brooke checked her analysis timeline, calculating the coordination requirements for the enemy's overall tactical plan. "Lieutenant, the communications assault should begin within the next 5 minutes. The withdrawal from the main attack positions is designed to free up personnel for the final assault phase." Lieutenant looked at her with growing respect. "Williams, I hope you're as good at predicting tactical movements as you've been at identifying positions." "We're about to find out, sir," she replied, checking her equipment one final time and reviewing the approach routes she'd memorized during months of unauthorized terrain study. The first indication of enemy movement came from Sergeant Collins in his overwatch position. "Contact, northeast ravine.
2 individuals moving toward the generator facility using cover discipline consistent with special operations training. Brooke's analysis had predicted this exact approach, but seeing it unfold in reality created a mixture of vindication and terror. Lieutenant, that's the diversionary team. The main assault force will begin their approach as soon as the first team engages. The enemy moved with professional precision, using terrain features and timing that demonstrated extensive reconnaissance and planning. They approached the generator facility using dead spaces in defensive coverage that Brooke had identified, but that standard security protocols hadn't addressed. "Collins, do you have a clear shot?" Peters asked through his radio. "Affirmative, but engagement will reveal our positions to the main assault force." Brooke realized they faced the classic tactical dilemma: engage the diversionary team and compromise their defensive positions, or maintain concealment and allow the enemy to disable backup power that might be critical for continued operations. "Lieutenant," she studied the tactical situation through the lens of her comprehensive analysis. "We let the diversionary team reach the generator facility, then engage them during their assault. That keeps our positions concealed until the main force commits to their approach." It was a calculated risk, based on intelligence analysis rather than combat experience, but Peters nodded his agreement. "All positions, hold fire until my command. Let them come to us." As the enemy team reached the generator facility and began placing explosive charges, Brooke felt the first real terror of combat, watching trained killers working methodically to destroy critical infrastructure while she waited in hiding, hoping that her theoretical knowledge would prove sufficient when bullets started flying. The explosion that destroyed the backup generator marked the beginning of the real battle, and Brooke realized that all her preparation had led to this moment when intelligence analysis would be tested against tactical reality in the most deadly way possible.
The generator facility erupted in a brilliant flash that temporarily illuminated the entire communications complex. The explosion's concussion wave rattled windows and sent debris raining down on their defensive positions, while secondary fires began spreading among the technical equipment. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the compound, but the loss of backup power meant that critical systems were now operating on primary generators that could be targeted next. "Main assault force moving up the southern approach," Sergeant Collins reported from his overwatch position. "Count 6 individuals with heavy weapon support advancing in coordinated fire teams." Brooke watched the enemy movement through her binoculars, seeing her months of analysis translated into deadly reality. The assault team moved exactly as her intelligence had predicted, using terrain features she'd mapped, following approach routes she'd identified, employing tactics consistent with the operational patterns she'd studied in intercepted communications. "Lieutenant, they'll establish a base of fire position behind the maintenance shed, then assault the main transmission building using suppressive fire from that location," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "We need to deny them that position, or they'll have clear fields of fire against the communications facility." Peters nodded, keying his radio. "Martinez, relocate to cover the maintenance shed approach. Do not let them establish positions behind that structure." The tactical situation developed with frightening speed as the enemy assault team reached their intermediate positions and began coordinating their final approach. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions as they laid down suppressive fire, forcing the defensive team to take cover while assault elements maneuvered toward their objectives. Brooke found herself pressed against a concrete barrier as bullets whined overhead, the theoretical knowledge of combat suddenly replaced by the visceral reality of people trying to kill her. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm her analytical capabilities, she forced herself to think through the tactical situation using the comprehensive understanding she developed during months of preparation. "Lieutenant, they're using standard assault doctrine with one modification," she called out during a brief lull in the firing. "They've positioned a sniper team in the eastern tree line to provide overwatch and prevent our withdrawal. We're effectively surrounded." Peters looked at her with new urgency. "Can we break out of the containment?" Brooke studied the terrain, cross-referencing her mental map with the current tactical situation. "There's a drainage culvert that runs under the access road. It's not covered by their overwatch positions, but reaching it requires crossing 30 meters of open ground under direct fire." The sound of gunfire intensified as the enemy assault team began their final approach to the communications building. Radio chatter indicated that the main battle at the base compound was also reaching its climax, with defensive teams struggling to maintain their positions against coordinated attacks that were proving more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. "Command, this is communications security. We're under heavy assault and may not be able to maintain defensive positions much longer." "Understood. Hold as long as possible. Communications capabilities are critical for coordinating reinforcements." But Brooke could see that holding their current positions was becoming impossible. The enemy had achieved tactical superiority through superior planning and positioning, exactly as her analysis had predicted they would, if allowed to execute their assault plan without interference. "Lieutenant," she said, making a decision that went far beyond her assigned role, "I can reach the drainage culvert and work my way to a flanking position behind their sniper team. If I can neutralize their overwatch capability, you can relocate the team to more defensible positions." Peters stared at her with disbelief. "Williams, you're an intelligence analyst, not a commando. That's 30 meters of open ground under sniper observation." "Sir, I know every inch of this terrain. I know where the sniper team is positioned, what their fields of observation cover, and what routes offer the best concealment." Brooke's voice carried conviction, built on months of comprehensive terrain analysis that had proven accurate in every detail. Another burst of gunfire forced them both down as bullets shattered concrete near their position. The enemy was gaining fire superiority, and their tactical position was deteriorating rapidly. "Williams, even if you reach the culvert, you'll be alone against a trained sniper team with no backup and no support," Peters said, trying to talk her out of what appeared to be a suicide mission. "Lieutenant, if we don't break their containment, they'll overrun this position and destroy the communications facility. Everything depends on maintaining contact with higher command for reinforcement coordination." She checked her weapon and equipment, preparing for the most dangerous moment of her life. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate reports from other defensive positions around the base. The coordinated enemy assault was proving more effective than anyone had anticipated, exactly as Brooke's dismissed intelligence assessments had warned it would be. "Sir," she said, looking at Peters with absolute determination, "3 months ago, I identified every element of this attack plan. My analysis was dismissed as unauthorized overreach by people who didn't understand what they were looking at. Right now, I'm the only person who knows their complete tactical setup well enough to exploit its weaknesses." Peters studied her face, seeing something that made him realize this wasn't bravado or desperation, but calculated decision-making based on superior intelligence. "Williams, if you're wrong about that sniper position, you'll be dead before you travel 10 meters. If I'm right, and I don't try, we'll all be dead in the next 15 minutes. She replied, and moved toward the edge of their defensive position before Peters could stop her.
Brooke crouched to the edge of the concrete barrier, studying the open ground between her position and the drainage culvert that represented her only chance of reaching a flanking position. 30 meters of exposed terrain under enemy observation, distance that could be covered in seconds under normal circumstances, but might as well be 30 miles when crossed under sniper fire. She forced herself to think analytically, applying her comprehensive terrain knowledge to the immediate tactical problem. The sniper team's position in the eastern tree line gave them excellent observation of the direct approaches to the communications facility, but their elevated angle created dead spaces at ground level that might provide momentary concealment. "Lieutenant, I'm moving in 10 seconds, she said into her radio, checking her weapon one final time. "When I reach the midpoint, lay down suppressive fire on the maintenance shed position to draw their attention." "Williams, this is insane," Peters replied, but she could hear him repositioning his team to provide covering fire. Brooke studied her planned route one more time, visualizing every step based on months of terrain analysis that had seemed academic until this moment. The first 15 meters would take her through a shallow depression that might provide limited concealment. The final 15 meters required crossing completely open ground, where speed would be her only protection. "Moving now," she whispered, then launched herself from cover with every ounce of speed and determination she possessed. The first steps felt surreal, running across terrain she'd studied in satellite imagery and topographical maps, but never experienced under combat conditions. Her feet found purchase on uneven ground as she sprinted toward the depression that marked the midpoint of her route, hyper-aware that enemy snipers were searching for targets through their scopes. The crack of rifle fire erupted behind her, as Peter's team began their diversionary attack on the maintenance shed, drawing enemy attention exactly as planned. But Brooke knew that trained snipers wouldn't be completely distracted by suppressive fire. They would continue scanning for targets while their assault team responded to the defensive fire. She reached the depression and dove for cover as a bullet whined overhead, close enough that she could feel the displacement of air. The sniper had spotted her movement and was adjusting for a killing shot, but her analysis of their position had been accurate enough to predict their field of fire and identify the brief moments when terrain features would mask her movement. "Williams, report," came Peter's voice through her earpiece. "Halfway there," she gasped, studying the final 15 meters that would take her to the drainage culvert. This section offered no concealment, just open ground that had to be crossed through speed and timing that relied entirely on her understanding of the enemy's tactical setup. She could hear the battle intensifying around the communications facility as the enemy assault team pressed their attack against Peter's diminished defensive force. Radio chatter indicated that other positions around the base were also under extreme pressure, with defensive teams requesting immediate reinforcement that might not be available. Brooke checked her watch, calculating the timing of the enemy's assault coordination based on her analysis of their operational patterns. They would be focused on their primary assault for the next 90 seconds before checking their overwatch positions, a brief window that might allow her to complete her flanking movement. "Covering fire in 3 seconds, she radioed, then launched herself from the depression toward the drainage culvert that represented survival or death, depending on the accuracy of her intelligence analysis. The final sprint felt like running through molasses as adrenaline distorted her perception of time and distance. Each step seemed to take forever, while simultaneously happening too fast to control. Behind her, Peter's team opened up with everything they had, creating a wall of suppressive fire that might buy her the seconds she needed. A bullet struck the ground inches from her feet, sending up a spray of dirt and concrete fragments. The sniper had reacquired her as a target and was adjusting for the killing shot that would end her desperate flanking attempt. But her analysis of sniper positioning had been precise enough to predict their likely adjustment patterns. She dove the final 3 meters, sliding into the drainage culvert as another bullet cracked overhead. The concrete tube provided blessed cover from observation, but now she faced the most dangerous part of her mission, working her way through the drainage system to reach a position behind the sniper team. "Williams, status," Peters called. "In the culvert," she replied, checking her equipment and orientation. "Beginning approach to target position." The drainage system was exactly as her engineering analysis had indicated. A concrete tube, large enough for a person to crawl through, running under the access road toward the eastern perimeter where the sniper team had positioned themselves. But crawling through the tube meant trusting her intelligence analysis completely, betting her life on months of unauthorized preparation that everyone had dismissed as inappropriate ambition. As she began working her way through the darkness towards what she hoped would be the enemy's flank, Brooke realized that this moment represented the ultimate test of everything she had worked for. Her comprehensive analysis, her unauthorized preparation, her refusal to accept institutional limitations, all of it came down to whether she could reach the sniper position and neutralize the threat that was preventing effective defense of the communications facility. Behind her, the sound of gunfire continued as Peter's team fought to hold their positions against overwhelming odds. Success or failure in the next few minutes would determine whether the base maintained its critical communications capabilities or fell to an enemy assault that had been planned while her warnings were dismissed as unauthorized overreach. The drainage culvert stretched ahead into darkness, leading towards a confrontation that would prove whether her months of preparation had been visionary analysis or the obsessive overthinking of an inexperienced analyst who didn't understand her limitations.
The drainage system ended abruptly at a concrete outflow that deposited Brooke into a shallow ravine 30 meters behind the enemy sniper team's position. She emerged from the culvert covered in mud and debris, but her navigation had been perfect. Months of studying terrain maps and satellite imagery had led her to exactly where she needed to be. Through the undergrowth, she could see two figures positioned behind a fallen log that provided excellent concealment and fields of fire covering the communications facility. They were professionals, she realized, watching their disciplined scanning patterns and communication discipline. These weren't local militants, but trained operatives who had planned this assault with military precision. The closer sniper was adjusting his scope, preparing for another shot at Peter's defensive team. Through her earpiece, Brooke could hear increasingly desperate radio traffic as the lieutenant's position came under intensifying pressure from the main assault force. The communications facility was being attacked from multiple directions while the sniper team prevented any tactical repositioning. "Williams, report your status," came Peter's voice, strained with the stress of combat leadership. "In position behind target," she whispered, studying the tactical situation and planning her approach. "Two shooters, professionally trained, focused on your position. Can you neutralize them?" The question hung in the air as Brooke realized she was being asked to engage trained killers in close combat, something far beyond her experience level or assigned duties. But her analysis of the overall tactical situation left no alternatives. If the sniper team wasn't eliminated, the communications facility would fall, base coordination would collapse, and the entire defensive effort might fail. "Attempting engagement," she replied, then began her approach through the undergrowth. Every skill she'd developed during months of unauthorized preparation came into play as she moved through terrain she'd studied but never experienced. Her knowledge of the sniper team's positioning, gained through comprehensive analysis of their operational patterns, allowed her to predict their attention focus and identify moments when movement might go undetected. The first sniper never knew she was there. Brooke reached his position during a moment when he was concentrating on target acquisition, placing her weapon against the base of his skull before he could react. "Don't move," she whispered, but training took over and he began turning toward her. The struggle was brief and decisive. Months of physical conditioning that others had dismissed as excessive paid off as Brooke used leverage and positioning to overcome her opponent's size advantage. But the confrontation wasn't silent, and the second sniper realized his partner was compromised. "Contact rear," the remaining sniper called into his radio, swinging his rifle toward Brooke's position. She dove for cover behind the log that had concealed the enemy team, but now found herself trapped in their position with limited options for movement or escape. The tactical situation reversed instantly. Instead of eliminating the sniper threat, Brooke found herself pinned down by the remaining shooter, while her movement had alerted the enemy assault team to the presence of flanking forces. Radio chatter indicated that they were redirecting personnel to eliminate the threat to their overwatch position. "Williams, what's your situation?" Peter's voice carried new urgency as gunfire erupted from multiple directions around her position. "One target neutralized, one still active. They're repositioning to surround my location." The comprehensive terrain analysis that had gotten her this far now became critical for survival. Brooke knew every fold in the ground, every potential cover position, every route that might offer escape from what was rapidly becoming an untenable tactical situation. "Lieutenant, you need to assault the communications facility immediately," she radioed, making a decision that prioritized the mission over her personal survival. "They're pulling personnel from the main assault to deal with me. You have a window to retake the objective." "Williams, we're not abandoning you." "Sir, that's an order," she replied, using authority she didn't technically possess, but that tactical necessity had granted her. "Take the facility while they're distracted." Through the undergrowth, she could see enemy personnel moving toward her position, at least 4 individuals with the coordinated movement patterns of special operations personnel. Her flanking attack had succeeded in disrupting their tactical plan, but now she faced overwhelming odds in close combat against professionally trained killers. Brooke checked her ammunition and equipment, calculating her options with the same analysis precision she'd applied to intelligence work. The math was simple. She could hold her position for perhaps 10 minutes before being overrun, but that might be enough time for Peter's team to retake the communications facility and restore critical coordination capabilities. As enemy forces closed on her position, she realized that her months of unauthorized preparation had led to this moment, not recognition or advancement, but the opportunity to prove that dedication and comprehensive analysis could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The validation she had sought had arrived in the most dangerous form possible, but it was validation nonetheless. The sound of approaching footsteps told her that the final confrontation was beginning, and everything would depend on whether her preparation had been sufficient for the ultimate test of combat against overwhelming odds.
The enemy closed on Brooke's position with tactical precision that confirmed her intelligence assessment. These were special operations personnel executing a carefully planned assault that her flanking attack had disrupted but not stopped. She counted at least 5 individuals moving through the undergrowth, using fire and movement techniques that spoke of extensive training and combat experience. Her position behind the fallen log provided limited cover but excellent observation of their approach routes. More importantly, her comprehensive terrain analysis allowed her to predict their likely assault patterns and identify the brief moments when she might achieve tactical surprise against superior numbers.
Williams, we've retaken the communications facility. Enemy assault team withdrew when we flanked their position. What's your status?
Surrounded by approximately 5 hostiles, she replied, watching enemy personnel establish positions that would allow coordinated assault on her location. They're preparing final assault now. The tactical mathematics were brutal. 5 trained operatives against 1 intelligence analyst with limited combat experience, fighting from a defensive position that offered minimal protection against coordinated attack. But Brooke's months of preparation had included contingency planning for exactly this type of situation. She'd studied close-quarters combat techniques, memorized optimal positioning for defensive engagement, and analyzed historical examples of successful defense against superior numbers. Most importantly, she understood that survival depended on using intelligence and preparation to offset disadvantages in training and experience. The first assault came from 3 directions simultaneously, classic special operations tactics designed to overwhelm defensive capabilities through coordinated pressure. Brooke responded with defensive fire that forced the attackers to take cover, but she knew this was merely delaying inevitable tactical defeat.
"Command, this is Peters," she heard through her radio. "We need immediate reinforcement at grid reference 774. Enemy assault team is engaged with multiple hostiles and requires support."
But reinforcement would take time that Brooke didn't have. The enemy assault team was already adjusting their approach, using suppressive fire to limit her movement while assault elements maneuvered for killing positions. Her defensive position was being systematically reduced as superior numbers and training took their inevitable toll. During a brief lull in the firing, Brooke heard something that made her blood run cold: the distinctive sound of a rocket-propelled grenade being prepared for launch. The enemy had decided to end the tactical stalemate with overwhelming firepower that would eliminate her position regardless of her defensive capabilities.
"All units," she radioed. "Williams is about to be engaged with heavy weapons. Enemy is preparing RPG assault on my position."
The launch of the rocket was preceded by a moment of absolute silence that seemed to stretch forever. Brooke pressed herself against the log that had provided cover, knowing that her survival now depended entirely on chance rather than preparation or skill. The explosion lifted her from the ground with devastating force, sending her crashing against a concrete barrier 20 feet from her original position. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent waves of pain through her body, but she retained consciousness long enough to realize that the blast had somehow thrown her into a position with better defensive cover. As her vision cleared, Brooke became aware of warm wetness spreading across her chest.
Looking down, she saw blood seeping through her tactical vest where shrapnel from the explosion had found gaps in her protective equipment. The wound was serious, possibly fatal without immediate medical attention, but it wasn't immediately incapacitating. Through the smoke and debris, she could see enemy personnel advancing towards what they assumed was her destroyed position. They moved with the confidence of professionals who believed their target had been eliminated by overwhelming firepower. But their assumption created the tactical opportunity that Brooke's comprehensive preparation had taught her to recognize and exploit. With her remaining strength, she began doing something that would later be recorded in military history as one of the most innovative tactical innovations ever documented. Using her own blood as ink and her finger as a pen, she began marking enemy positions on the concrete wall behind her, creating a real-time tactical map that could guide defensive fire from Peter's team at the communications facility. Each mark represented hours of intelligence analysis translated into actionable information that could save lives. The enemy's positions, their movement patterns, their tactical priorities, all of it documented in crimson notation that transformed her wound into a strategic advantage. "Peters, this is Williams," she whispered into her radio, her voice weakening but determined. "I'm marking target positions on the eastern concrete barrier. Coordinates are being painted in real time." The response was immediate disbelief. "Williams, what are you talking about? Are you injured?" "Hit but functional," she replied, continuing to mark positions as enemy personnel moved through terrain she'd analyzed for months. "Using blood markers to identify targets for your fire direction. Grid references follow terrain analysis in my files." As consciousness began to fade, Brooke realized that her months of unauthorized preparation had culminated in this moment. Wounded but still serving, using her own blood to provide the intelligence that might save the lives of soldiers who had once dismissed her capabilities. The validation was written in crimson on concrete, visible proof that preparation and dedication could overcome any limitations others might impose.
The intelligence center transformed into a combat command post as Brooke accessed files she'd been ordered never to create. Her comprehensive threat assessment materialized on the main display screen, showing enemy positions, likely escape routes, communication nodes, and tactical vulnerabilities that standard reconnaissance had failed to identify. The detail was extraordinary. Months of unauthorized analysis compressed into actionable intelligence that could change the course of the battle. Major Coach stared at the display with growing amazement and horror. "Williams, how long have you had this information?" 3 months of detailed development, sir. 6 weeks since I identified the final attack indicators." Her voice carried no satisfaction, only urgency, as explosions continued to rock the compound, and radio chatter indicated mounting casualties among the defensive teams. The tactical map showed what Coach now realized was a masterpiece of intelligence analysis. Enemy positions were marked not just with current locations, but with predicted movement patterns, supply lines, and command structures. Brooke had identified the attack's staging areas, approach routes, and even probable withdrawal plans based on her comprehensive study of regional terrain and tactical doctrines. "Martinez, this is Command. We have precise intelligence on enemy positions. Stand by for targeting coordinates." While Coach coordinated with field teams, Brooke noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her analysis indicated that the current attack was likely a diversion designed to draw defensive forces away from the base's primary vulnerability, the Eastern Communications Array that controlled all external contact and coordination with higher command. "Sir," she interrupted, pointing to a section of her tactical assessment, "the main attack is probably targeting our communications hub. This assault is designed to fix our attention while a smaller team infiltrates the eastern perimeter." Coach looked where she was pointing, seeing the logic immediately. "If they take out communications, we can't call for reinforcement or coordinate with regional command.
Exactly, sir. And according to my analysis, the optimal approach routes leads directly through Sector 7, where security coverage has gaps during shift changes. Brooke had identified this vulnerability months ago, but it had been dismissed as theoretical concern, requiring verification that never came. The radio crackled with reports from Captain Martinez's team, who were beginning to engage enemy positions using coordinates from Brooke's intelligence. Command, targets are exactly where intelligence indicated. We are achieving effective suppression on the northern ridge. But even as one crisis was being addressed, Brooke could see the larger tactical picture developing exactly as her analysis had predicted. The enemy's real objective wasn't to overrun the base, but to isolate it, cut communications, and create conditions for a systematic assault that would overwhelm defensive capabilities. "Sir, we need to dispatch a team to protect the communications array immediately," she urged, checking her analysis of infiltration routes and timing windows. "Based on attack coordination, they'll move on the communications hub within the next 15 minutes. Coach grabbed his radio again. "Reynolds, this is command. We need immediate security reinforcement at the Eastern Communications Facility. Potential infiltration threat via Sector 7 approach." "Command, most of our security teams are engaged with the primary assault. I can spare maybe 4 personnel for communication security." Brooke studied her tactical assessment, calculating enemy strength and probable infiltration team size based on the coordination requirements for their overall assault plan. 4 defenders wouldn't be sufficient to protect the communications array against a determined infiltration team that had planned this operation for months. "Sir," she said, turning to Coach with growing determination, "I know those approach routes better than anyone. I know where they'll position themselves, how they'll coordinate the assault, and what their tactical priorities will be. I can guide the defensive response in real time." Coach stared at her with disbelief. "Williams, you're an intelligence analyst, not a field operative. Your job is to provide information, not to participate in combat operations." "My job is to serve this unit and protect our people," Brooke replied, feeling the same certainty that had driven her unauthorized analysis for months. "Right now, I'm the only person who understands their tactical plan well enough to predict their moves and coordinate an effective defense." The sound of gunfire was intensifying, and radio reports indicated that the main assault was increasing in ferocity, while defensive teams struggled to maintain their positions. Coach looked at the tactical display, at the comprehensive intelligence that had proven devastatingly accurate, and at the young analyst who somehow anticipated everything that was now happening. "Williams, if you're wrong about the communications assault, we'll have diverted resources from defending against the main attack," he said, weighing impossible decisions under combat pressure. "Sir, if I'm right and we don't act, they'll cut our communications and coordinate a final assault that our defensive positions can't repel." Brooke's voice carried absolute conviction based on months of analysis that everyone had dismissed until crisis proved its accuracy. Coach made his decision. "Reynolds, Williams is coming with the communication security team. She knows the enemy's likely approach routes and tactical priorities. Follow her intelligence guidance for defensive positioning." As Brooke gathered her gear and prepared to leave the relative safety of the intelligence center, she realized that this moment represented everything she'd been preparing for during months of unauthorized analysis and comprehensive threat assessment. Her institutional limitations were being swept away by tactical necessity, but the price of vindication might be measured in lives, including her own.
6 months later, Brooke Williams stood in the same briefing room where her comprehensive intelligence analysis had once been dismissed as unauthorized overreach. But everything had changed. The Distinguished Service Cross on her uniform carried weight that her previous analytical excellence never had, and when she spoke, the assembled officers listened with attention that bordered on reverence. "The enemy's tactical innovation in the March assault demonstrates the importance of comprehensive threat assessment," she told the gathered intelligence personnel, pointing to updated analysis protocols that now bore her name. "Pattern recognition across multiple intelligence disciplines can identify threats that specialized analysis might miss." Major Koch, now Colonel Koch after his promotion following the successful defense of Base Nightingale, nodded approvingly.
Williams' analytical methodology has become standard operating procedure for all forward operating bases in the region. Her comprehensive approach identified threat indicators that conventional analysis failed to recognize. The transformation was remarkable but hard-earned. Brooke's blood-painted tactical map had guided defensive fire that eliminated the remaining enemy assault team, but her wounds had required weeks of recovery and rehabilitation. More significantly, her unauthorized intelligence methods had undergone intense scrutiny by senior command before being validated and incorporated into official doctrine. The young analyst who had once been relegated to equipment manifests now held the position of senior intelligence analyst with direct advisory authority to base command. Her comprehensive threat assessment protocols were being implemented across multiple operational theaters, and her tactical innovations were taught in advanced intelligence courses throughout the military. Captain Peters, now Major Peters, after his own promotion following the successful defense of Base Nightingale, approached her after the briefing with the familiar grin of someone who had shared combat with a proven warrior. "Williams, I've got 3 new analysts requesting assignment to your intelligence section. Apparently, everyone wants to work with the person who used her own blood to create tactical maps." Brooke smiled at the comment, though she still felt uncomfortable with the dramatic reputation that had grown around those desperate moments during the assault. The blood marking was necessity, not innovation. Any analyst with comprehensive terrain knowledge could have done the same thing. "But they didn't," Peters replied seriously. "They didn't because they weren't prepared. You spent months developing capabilities that no one asked for, studying terrain that wasn't your responsibility, analyzing threats that others dismissed. When the crisis came, you were ready." The base had become a model for integrated intelligence operations, with analysts expected to develop comprehensive regional expertise rather than narrow specialization. Brooke's unauthorized analytical methods were now official doctrine, and her insistence on understanding the broader tactical picture had been validated by results that saved lives and protected critical infrastructure. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds, who had once criticized her for exceeding assigned parameters, now served as her administrative coordinator. "Williams, the Pentagon wants a detailed briefing on your analytical methodology next month. They're considering implementing your protocols as standard doctrine for all intelligence operations." The irony wasn't lost on her. The same comprehensive analysis that had been dismissed as inappropriate ambition was now being studied for implementation across the entire military intelligence community. Her refusal to accept institutional limitations had become the foundation for systemic change that recognized the value of preparation over protocol. But the most significant transformation was personal. Brooke no longer felt the need to prove herself through unauthorized overwork or excessive preparation. Her capabilities were recognized, her methods were validated, and her contributions were valued by colleagues who understood that excellence couldn't be constrained by narrow job descriptions. During evening briefings, she often caught sight of younger analysts who reminded her of herself 6 months earlier, dedicated personnel whose comprehensive approach to intelligence work was being encouraged rather than criticized. The base's analytical capabilities had been revolutionized by recognizing that effective intelligence required understanding connections between seemingly unrelated information sources. "Williams," Colonel Cox said as the briefing concluded, "Intelligence Command wants to know if you're interested in developing training protocols for advanced analytical techniques. They're establishing a new school for comprehensive threat assessment." The opportunity represented everything she'd worked toward: recognition of her methods, validation of her approach, and the chance to teach others that preparation and comprehensive analysis could overcome institutional limitations. But it also meant leaving the operational environment where her innovations had proven their worth. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'd prefer to remain in the field. Intelligence analysis is most effective when analysts understand the tactical realities that their assessments support." As she walked across the base that evening, Brooke reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed logistics specialist to recognized intelligence innovator.
The transformation hadn't come through following established procedures or accepting imposed limitations, but through refusing to let others define the boundaries of her contributions. The base operated with new confidence, built on comprehensive intelligence that recognized patterns others had missed. Threats were identified earlier, defensive preparations were more thorough, and tactical responses were informed by analysis that understood regional complexities rather than focusing on narrow specializations. Somewhere in the surrounding hills, potential threats were being monitored by intelligence systems that incorporated Brooke's methodological innovations. Her blood-painted tactical map had been photographed and preserved as an example of battlefield innovation, but more importantly, her analytical approach had become the foundation for preventing future crises rather than merely responding to them. The radio crackled with routine intelligence updates from patrol teams whose missions were guided by comprehensive threat assessments that identified patterns and predicted potential developments. Base security operated with information that connected tactical indicators to strategic implications, exactly as Brooke had always believed effective intelligence should function. As she reviewed the next day's intelligence requirements, Brooke smiled at the memory of being told to limit her analysis to assigned sectors. Now her comprehensive approach was standard operating procedure, and young analysts were encouraged to exceed their formal responsibilities in service of mission effectiveness. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued. Because that's what happened when people stopped accepting limitations and started exceeding expectations. One comprehensive analysis at a time, one life saved at a time, one impossible moment made routine through preparation that refused to acknowledge the word impossible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.